Newport, Rhode Island. Summer, 1895. Beyond the cliff walk, where Atlantic waves crash against rock, stands a palazzo that doesn't belong. 70 rooms. Walls covered in marble quarried across an ocean. Ceilings painted by artists imported from Italy. This is The Breakers, and today we uncover the dark story behind America's most extravagant summer cottage. For most visitors, it's just a museum of wealth. Beautiful rooms, guided tours, carefully roped-off furniture. But behind these walls lived a family that watched their empire crumble. Here, servants worked 18-hour days, while their employers entertained in rooms that cost more per square foot than most Americans earned in a lifetime. Here, a railroad fortune built on broken workers and crushed competitors was transformed into marble and gold. Here, the Vanderbilts believed they had built something permanent. They were catastrophically wrong. How does a family convince themselves that excess equals security? What price did hundreds of invisible workers pay so that 70 rooms could gleam? And when the foundation finally cracked, when the money dried up and the world moved on, what remained of the dream they tried to carve into stone? If you enjoy deep investigations into Gilded Age architecture and the families who built them, your support makes these detailed stories possible. Tell me in the comments which historic mansion we should explore next. Let's begin with fire. August 1892. A different house, also called The Breakers, stands on this same cliff. Not the palazzo, not the marble halls tourists photograph today. A wooden structure, comfortable by the standards of the time, large but not spectacular. The Vanderbilt summer home. Cornelius Vanderbilt II is in Europe when the telegram reaches him. Fire. The house is burning. By the time the news crosses the Atlantic, there's nothing left but foundation stones and twisted metal. The fire started in the early morning hours. Servants smelled smoke, tried to wake the family. Flames moved faster than anyone expected through wooden walls and summer-dry timbers. Everyone got out alive. That was the miracle. The structure itself, total loss. Cornelius stands in his London hotel room, reading the telegram again and again. His first thought is relief. His wife Alice is safe. His children are safe. The staff survived. His second thought is darker and more complicated. He's 49 years old, head of the New York Central Railroad, heir to the largest fortune in America, grandson of the Commodore, the man who built the family empire from nothing, and a wooden house just burned down around his family while he was an ocean away. The vulnerability is intolerable. Rich men of Cornelius's generation believed deeply in a specific kind of logic. Wealth should equal security. Success should mean control. Power should translate into safety. When something breaks that equation, the response is predictable. Build bigger, build stronger, build in materials that cannot burn. The decision forms before Cornelius even boards the ship home. He will rebuild the Breakers, not as it was, as something that cannot be destroyed, something that announces permanence with every stone, something so solid, so overwhelming, so obviously built to last that fire, time and fate itself will have to acknowledge defeat. He's wrong, of course, but he doesn't know that yet. The commission goes to Richard Morris Hunt, the same architect who designed Biltmore for Cornelius's brother-in-law George Vanderbilt. Hunt is America's premier architect, trained at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, designer of the pedestal for the Statue of Liberty, the man wealthy families turn to when they want European grandeur stamped onto American ground. Cornelius tells him the requirements. Italian Renaissance palazzo, 70 rooms at minimum, built entirely of fireproof materials, stone, marble, steel, tile, no wood in the main structure, not in walls, not in beams, not anywhere that could burn, and it has to be ready in 3 years. Hunt listens and likely does some mental arithmetic. 3 years, 70 rooms, complete fireproofing, materials shipped from Europe, labor on a scale Newport has never seen. The budget will be extraordinary, multiple millions, perhaps 5, perhaps 7, perhaps more depending on finishes and details. In 1890s dollars, each million equals roughly 30 million today. Cornelius doesn't flinch. Money is the one problem he doesn't have. His share of the Vanderbilt Railroad fortune generates income faster than he can realistically spend it. Not that he isn't trying. The New York mansion, the country estate, the art collection, annual operating costs that would fund a small town, but still the money keeps coming. So yes, he'll pay whatever the palazzo costs. Build it right, build it fast, build it to last forever. Hunt's plans arrive in stages through 1893. Drawings, elevations, sections, details. What emerges on paper is audacious even by Gilded Age standards. The main house will cover an acre of ground, 70 rooms spread across 4 floors, a great hall rising 3 stories, open to a ceiling painted with mythological scenes, a music room paneled entirely in platinum leaf and carved oak, a dining room to seat 30 beneath crystal chandeliers, a library, a billiards room, a morning room, conservatories, ballrooms, bedrooms numbered and designated for family, guests, and servants, with strict hierarchies observed even in the floor plan. The service wing will be its own world. Kitchens, pantries, sculleries, laundry, wine cellars, storage for china, crystal, linens, servant staircases hidden in the walls, a heating plant in the basement, with boilers, massive enough to warm every room, even in Atlantic winter storms. Technologically, the house will be cutting edge. Electricity throughout, running water in every major room, central heating, call buttons wired to panel boards so servants can be summoned without shouting, elevators, telephones, the full apparatus of modernity wrapped in a Renaissance costume. Structurally, it will be a fortress. Steel framing, walls of limestone and marble, roof of terracotta tiles, every major beam, every support, fireproofed and rated to carry loads far beyond what the building will ever face. The foundation will go down to bedrock. The palazzo will be anchored to the continent itself. Hunt's budget estimate comes in around $5 million. Cornelius approves it immediately. Construction begins in spring of 1893. What follows is a masterclass in Gilded Age logistics, ambition, and the sheer human cost of trying to make permanence out of stone. The site is cleared in weeks. The old foundation torn out. Excavation begins, cutting down through soil and clay to reach solid rock. Steam-powered equipment digs and hauls. Teams of laborers, mostly Italian immigrants and Irish workers, swing picks and shovel dirt into carts. The foundation takes months. Concrete poured into trenches, allowed to cure, tested, and then built upon. Steel framing arrives by rail from Pittsburgh, each beam numbered to match Hunt's drawings. Cranes hoist them into place. Riveters seal the connections. The skeleton of the house rises through summer and fall. Limestone blocks are shipped from quarries in Indiana, each piece cut, numbered, and tagged. They arrive at Newport's docks, transferred to wagons, and move slowly up to the construction site. Stonemasons, many brought over from Italy, set each block with precision. Joints are tight. Mortar is mixed on site. Progress is visible but slow. The walls climb a few feet per week. By winter, the shell is taking shape. Enough structure stands that you can walk through and imagine the finished rooms. But imagining is all anyone can do yet. The interior work hasn't started. That will require an entirely different scale of craft. Through 1894, the pace accelerates. Hunt brings in specialized contractors for every major element. Marble suppliers from Italy ship slabs of rare stone, verde antico, cipollino, pavonazzo, colors and patterns that haven't been quarried in centuries, pulled from old buildings and reworked, or extracted from sites. Hunt's agents located specifically for this project. Plaster craftsmen model cornices and ceiling details. Gilders apply gold and platinum leaf in rooms that will dazzle under electric light. Woodworkers carve paneling for the library and smoking room, even though Cornelius insisted on fireproof materials. The compromise is that wood appears only as decorative veneer over steel and stone, beautiful but secondary, unable to support or betray the structure. Tile workers lay floors in patterns that took months to design. Each room gets its own scheme. The entrance hall, marble in contrasting colors, geometric precision. The music room, parquet-style tile that mimics wood, but will never burn. Bathroom floors, mosaics imported from workshops in Venice. Painters arrive to work on the ceilings.
So,
The Great Hall ceiling alone takes a team of artists more than a year. Mythological scenes, cherubs, clouds, all painted in the style of Italian Renaissance masters, not copies, original compositions, designed to make visitors look up and forget, for a moment, that they're standing in a house built in 1895 Rhode Island, and not a 16th century palazzo in Florence. The logistics are staggering. Hundreds of workers on site at the peak, craftsmen who speak half a dozen languages, supply chains stretching across the Atlantic, materials arriving daily, inspections, revisions, delays when a shipment is damaged in transit, or a detail doesn't match Hunt's exacting standards. Cornelius visits the site regularly. He walks through framed rooms, studies drawings with Hunt, asks questions, makes changes. Nothing major, just tweaks. A window adjustment here, a doorway widened there. Each small decision adds days and dollars, but he's building a fortress. Details matter. Behind the facade work, another construction project unfolds. The service infrastructure. The basement becomes a mechanical city. Boilers are installed. Coal-fired furnaces that will eat tons of fuel every winter. Pipes run through walls and under floors, carrying steam heat to radiators in every room. The kitchen is laid out with industrial precision. Massive ranges, ovens that can roast meat for 50 guests, sinks with running hot and cold water, still a luxury in many American homes. Ice boxes big enough to store provisions for weeks. Separate prep areas for vegetables, meat, pastry, a scullery for washing dishes, storage rooms for dry goods. The whole operation designed so that meals can be produced at scale, course after course, without the family or their guests ever seeing the chaos required to make it happen. Servant quarters are carved into the upper floors and attic spaces. Small rooms, narrow beds, minimal decoration, functional. The message is clear even in the architecture. This is not your house. You work here, you sleep here, but the beauty, the space, the luxury that belongs to someone else. A separate staircase system runs through the building. Staff can move from basement kitchens to upper floor bedrooms without ever crossing the main halls. Invisible circulation. The 20th century version of medieval castles, where nobles and servants occupied the same structure, but walked different paths and never quite met. The electrical system is installed with care, wiring threaded through walls, junction boxes hidden, switches placed discreetly. Cornelius wants modernity, but not at the cost of aesthetics. The fixtures themselves are custom designed. Chandeliers that blend gaslight style with electric bulbs. 6-cents that look like they belong in a Renaissance palace, but are wired to a generator in the basement. The plumbing is equally advanced. Bathrooms in every family bedroom. Porcelain fixtures imported from Europe. Marble sinks. Tile walls. Hot water on demand, supplied by the same boilers that heat the house. For 1895, this is cutting edge. Most wealthy families still rely on chamber pots and pitchers. The Vanderbilts will have modern plumbing, wrapped in Renaissance marble, By spring of 1895, the house is nearly complete. The roof is on, the windows are in. The exterior stonework is finished. What remains is furnishing, final touches, the transformation from construction site to completed residence. Hunt oversees the installation of furniture, much of it custom-made to his designs. Pieces that match the scale of the rooms, sofas and chairs that don't look lost in a 3-story great hall, tables sized for 30 guest dinners, beds with carved headboards and silk canopies. Draperies are hung, thick, heavy fabric that puddles on marble floors, designed to soften acoustics in rooms where stone and tile would otherwise make every sound echo. Rugs are laid, Persian, Turkish, European, each chosen to complement the color scheme Hunt has orchestrated for that particular space. Art arrives, paintings, sculptures, tapestries. Cornelius has been collecting for years, and much of it was stored after the fire. Now it finds new walls, old masters, portraits, landscapes, classical bronzes. The collection is not as extensive as some Gilded Age fortunes, but it's carefully chosen. Each piece selected to reinforce the message. This is not just wealth. This is taste. Finally, the details. Silver placed in dining room cabinets, crystal stocked in pantries, linens embroidered with the Vanderbilt monogram folded into wardrobes, clocks set and wound, flowers arranged, staff hired and drilled in their duties. The house is ready. Summer 1895. The Vanderbilts move in. Cornelius, Alice, and their children take possession of 70 rooms on a cliff above the Atlantic. The house they now occupy cost, by most estimates, somewhere between $7 and $11 million. In today's terms, that's over $200 million just for construction. Operating costs will be separate, ongoing, relentless. The staff required to keep the breakers functioning numbers around 40 during the off-season, and swells to more than 60 when the family is in residence and entertaining. Each person has a defined role: butler, housekeeper, footman, maids, cooks, scullery workers, laundresses, valets, ladies' maids, coachmen, stable hands, groundskeepers, engineers to tend the boilers and electrical systems. The wages add up. A head butler in the 1890s earns around $800 per year. Lower staff make far less. A scullery maid might see $150 annually. Multiply that across 60 positions, and the payroll alone runs into tens of thousands every year. Add food, uniforms, supplies, coal for heating, maintenance, repairs, property taxes, insurance. The house consumes money at a pace that would terrify most wealthy families. For Cornelius, it's manageable. Barely. His income from the railroad fortune is immense, but it's not infinite, and he's not the only Vanderbilt with expensive tastes. His siblings have their own estates. His extended family expects support, loans, bailouts when investments go bad. The fortune that seemed infinite to his grandfather is being divided, spent, and slowly drained. But in 1895, standing in the great hall with sunlight streaming through tall windows and the sound of the ocean just beyond the terrace, it's easy to believe the money will never run out. The palazzo is perfect. The servants are in place. The machinery is humming. Cornelius has built exactly what he set out to build after the fire. A house that cannot burn. A fortress of marble and stone. A monument to permanence. What he hasn't built, what no amount of money or marble can construct, is protection from time, from economics, from the shifting ground of history. The palazzo will stand. The family will not. The first summer at the Breakers unfolds as Cornelius and Alice imagined. House parties, dinners for 30, guests arriving by carriage, later by automobile, as the new century approaches. Afternoons on the terrace overlooking the Atlantic, evening musicals in the music room, cards and conversation in the library, breakfast served in the morning room, luncheon on the loggia, tea in the drawing room, 7-course dinners in the dining room, each course timed to perfection, servants moving in choreographed silence. Newport in the 1890s is the undisputed capital of American aristocracy. Wealthy families from New York, Boston, Philadelphia build summer cottages here. Cottage is the term, though the structures are anything but. Marble Hall, Rose Cliff, Ochre Court, each trying to outdo the others in scale and splendor. The season runs from June through September, a relentless social calendar. Balls, lawn parties, yacht races, tennis tournaments, casino nights. The whole performance designed around a single goal, seeing and being seen, reinforcing status, confirming that you belong to the tiny circle at the top of American wealth and power. The Breakers immediately becomes the crown jewel of this world, not just because it's the largest, though it is, not just because it cost the most, though it probably did, but because of what it represents. Cornelius Vanderbilt II is the head of the Vanderbilt family. His grandfather built the railroad empire. His father expanded it. Now Cornelius runs it. He's not just rich, he's the rich. Old money by American standards. 3 generations, 50 years. In Europe that's nothing. In the United States, it's dynasty. The palazzo announces all of this without words. Guests walk through the entrance hall and understand immediately. This is power. This is arrival. This is what it looks like when wealth becomes permanence. But hosting at this level is work. Alice Vanderbilt manages the household with the intensity of a military campaign. Menus planned weeks in advance. Guest lists curated with care. Seating charts that navigate the treacherous waters of social hierarchy. Who sits near whom? Who gets which bedroom? Who is invited at all? Every decision is a calculation. Staff prepare for days before a major party. Rooms cleaned to perfection. Silver polished until it glows. Crystal washed and inspected for chips. Linens pressed. Flowers arranged and refreshed. Kitchens stocked with provisions. The day of the house operates on split-second timing. Courses emerge from the kitchen in precise sequence. Footmen serve from the left, clear from the right. Wine glasses are filled, never empty, never overfull. Butter refreshes drinks between courses. The lady's maid ensures Alice's wardrobe is flawless. The valet does the same for Cornelius. Everything runs smoothly because dozens of people are working frantically out of sight to make it look effortless. This is the core bargain of Gilded Age entertaining. Guests experience magic. Staff experience exhaustion. And the family occupies a strange middle ground, directing the performance, funding it, but also trapped by it. Because once you build a palazzo like the Breakers, you can't just live in it quietly. The house demands to be used. It requires justification. You have to fill those 70 rooms. You have to prove the expense was worth it. You have to perform wealth and taste and power, again and again, for an audience that is always judging, always comparing, always ready to decide you've slipped. Cornelius feels this pressure acutely. He's not naturally social. By multiple accounts, he's serious, formal, duty-bound. He works long hours on railroad business. He sits on corporate boards. He manages family investments. The entertaining, the parties, the endless parade of guests, that's necessary but exhausting. Alice thrives on it more. But even she finds the pace draining. The children mostly enjoy it when they're young. The house is a playground, endless rooms to explore, staff who indulge them. The ocean right there, waves crashing on rocks, a private beach below the cliff. But as they grow, the weight of expectation settles. They are Vanderbilts. They have a name to uphold, marriages to make that strengthen the family's position, roles to play in society. The palazzo is both their inheritance and their cage. By the late 1890s, a pattern has set in. Winters in New York at the Vanderbilt Mansion on Fifth Avenue. Summers in Newport at the breakers. Spring and fall split between the two, or spent traveling in Europe. The rhythm is predictable, comfortable, exhausting. Cornelius is aging faster than he should. He's in his early 50s, but looks older. The stress of managing the railroad, the family, the estates, the constant pressure of being the head of America's most famous fortune, it's taking a toll. In 1896, he suffers a stroke, mild by the standards of the time, but a warning. He survives, recovers partially, but he's never quite the same. His speech is slower, his energy lower. He still works, still manages, still fulfills his duties, but the edge is gone. Alice takes on more of the social responsibilities. The children, now teenagers and young adults, step into more visible roles. The palazzo continues to shine, but the man who built it is fading. Then comes September 1899. Cornelius Vanderbilt II, age 55, suffers a massive stroke at the breakers. He's in the billiards room, collapses. Servants rush to help. Doctors are summoned. They do what they can, which in 1899 is very little. He lingers for hours, unconscious. Alice sits with him. The children are called. The family gathers. He dies just after midnight on September 12th. The house he built to last forever has been his home for barely 4 years. The funeral is massive. New York society turns out in force. Newspapers run front-page obituaries. Cornelius Vanderbilt II, head of the Vanderbilt family, dead at 55. The railroad empire passes to new hands. The fortune is divided according to his will. Alice inherits the breakers, a life estate. She can live there, use it, but she cannot sell it. When she dies, it passes to their eldest son. The logic is standard for the time. Keep the property in the family. Prevent widows from squandering estates. Ensure continuity, but it also locks Alice into a role. She is now the keeper of the palazzo, the guardian of Cornelius's dream. Whether she wants that job or not, it's hers. She chooses to embrace it. Through the early 1900s, Alice continues the Newport seasons. The breakers remains the center of summer society. Parties, dinners, the full performance. She's older now, moving into her 60s, but she maintains standards. The house will be kept exactly as Cornelius intended. Staff levels stay high. Maintenance is rigorous. Every crack in plaster is repaired. Every tarnished fixture is polished. The palazzo must remain perfect, but the world outside the gates is changing in ways Alice cannot control and perhaps does not fully see. The Gilded Age is ending. The easy accumulation of vast fortunes is getting harder. Labor movements are organizing. Strikes are more frequent. Progressive politicians are calling for regulation, for taxes on wealth, for limits on corporate power. Hold. The railroads, the foundation of Vanderbilt money, are under pressure. Competition, new technologies, government oversight. The golden goose is not dead, but it's laying fewer eggs. And the younger generation of Vanderbilts, Cornelius's children and their cousins, are spending faster than the empire can regenerate. Gilded Age families had a typical trajectory. First generation builds the fortune, holders. Second generation consolidates and expands it. Third generation spends it. All fourth generation wakes up broke. The Vanderbilts are entering stage 3. Alice, living at the breakers through the 1900s and 1910s, watches this unfold. Her children marry. Some marriages are solid, others are disasters, divorces, scandals, financial mismanagement. All fortunes that were supposed to be secure start looking fragile. The operating costs of the breakers never go down. 40 to 60 staff, coal, electricity, water, repairs, property taxes, insurance. The annual bill runs into the tens of thousands, creeping towards 6 figures as the decades pass, and inflation eats at the dollar. Alice can cover it. The life estate includes income, but it's not as easy as it was in Cornelius's day. Choices have to be made, certain luxuries curtailed. The house parties become less frequent, the entertaining more selective. By World War I, Newport's golden age is dimming. Many of the great summer cottages are already feeling like relics. Young people are less interested in the rigid social hierarchies their parents and grandparents maintained. The war reshapes everything. The world that built the breakers, the confident, optimistic, expansion-obsessed Gilded Age, is gone. What replaces it is faster, harsher, less certain. Alice dies in 1934. She's 89 years old. She held the breakers for 35 years, maintaining it as a shrine to her husband's vision. When she finally lets go, the estate passes to her daughter Gladys, now Countess Széchenyi, after marrying a Hungarian count. Gladys inherits the palazzo and immediately faces an impossible question. What do you do with a 70-room marble palace in the middle of the Great Depression? The Depression hits Newport hard. Tourism collapses. The wealthy families who once filled the summer cottages are broke or struggling. Some estates are already being sold off, torn down, abandoned. The ones that survive do so by cutting costs to the bone. Gladys, Countess Széchenyi, looks at the books and sees disaster. The breakers cost roughly $100,000 per year to operate. In 1930s money, that's an astronomical sum. Her income from family investments has cratered. The stock market crash wiped out huge chunks of Vanderbilt wealth. The railroads are in decline. Government regulation and competition have slashed profits. The easy money is gone. She tries to keep the house going. Staff is cut from 60 to 30, then to 20. Rooms are closed off. Heat is shut down in unused wings. Maintenance is deferred. Small repairs are ignored, allowed to become larger problems because there's no budget to fix them now. Even with these cuts, the numbers don't work. By the late 1930s, Gladys is burning through capital just to keep the doors open. She considers selling, but who would buy? The market for 70-room marble palazzos in the middle of a depression is non-existent. Even if she found a buyer, they would immediately face the same problem. The house costs more to run than almost anyone can afford. The structure that Cornelius built to be permanent, fireproof, eternal, is turning into an anchor. Beautiful, impressive, and slowly dragging the family underwater. Then comes World War II. Everything stops. Tourism ends entirely. Gasoline rationing makes travel nearly impossible. The staff that remains is pulled away, either enlisted or drawn to war production jobs that pay better than domestic service ever did. By 1943, the breakers is essentially closed. A caretaker, and maybe one or two others, keep it from falling apart. Rooms go unheated through winter. Damp creeps into plaster. Leaks develop and go unrepaired. The palazzo that was supposed to last forever is starting to decay from neglect. Gladys knows she's losing the fight. The house will not survive as a private residence. The costs are unsustainable. The world has moved on. Families don't live like this anymore, and even if they wanted to, almost no one can afford it. In 1948, she makes a decision that saves the palazzo but ends the Vanderbilt era. She leases the breakers to the Preservation Society of Newport County for $1 per year. Later, the arrangement becomes a donation, with the family retaining limited private use of a few rooms. The house is no longer a home, it's a museum. The transformation is gradual but total. Rooms are roped off. Furniture is tagged and catalogued. Tours begin. Tourists pay admission, walk through the great hall, the dining room, the music room, stare at the marble and gold and painted ceilings, and listen to guides explain how the Vanderbilts lived. The story told in those early tours is sanitized. Guides talk about the architecture, the art, the beauty. They mention Cornelius's tragic early death. They gloss over the labor. They don't talk about the servants' 18-hour days, the wage disparities, the class system literally built into the floor plan. They don't mention that the fortune was made by crushing competitors, exploiting workers, and manipulating markets. They don't ask what it cost, morally and practically, to build something this extravagant. The house is presented as a fairy tale. Once upon a time, a wealthy family built a beautiful palace. The end. It will take decades before the fuller story starts being told. Walk through the breakers today, and the bones of that sanitized narrative are still visible. The guided tours hit the same beats. The Great Hall, the music room, the dining room, the library. Guides recite facts. 70 rooms, $7 million in construction costs, marble from Italy. The house took 3 years to build. Tourists take photos. They marvel at the scale, the detail, the sheer audacity of building something this elaborate as a summer house. Most leave impressed. Some leave troubled, though they might not articulate why. Something about the excess feels uncomfortable. A house this large for one family. Servants' quarters tucked into corners. The gap between the grand rooms tourists see and the cramped functional spaces workers inhabited. That discomfort is the crack where the real story starts to show through. In recent years, the Preservation Society has started expanding the narrative, not dramatically, not in ways that scare off visitors who came for the fairy tale, but carefully. New tours focus on servant life, below-stairs experiences that take visitors into the kitchens, the laundry, the staff dining room. These tours name names. They talk about real people who worked here. Mary, Thomas, Catherine. Positions, wages, schedules, the 18-hour days. The strict hierarchy. The vulnerability of workers who could be fired for almost any reason, and who had little recourse. They talk about the technology. The call buttons that allowed the family to summon servants without shouting. The separate staircases that kept workers invisible. The basement heating plant that required constant stoking. The industrial kitchens designed to produce elaborate meals while keeping all evidence of labor hidden from guests. This shift toward honesty is valuable but incomplete. The tours still treat the breakers primarily as an artifact of taste and wealth, a monument to what money could buy in the Gilded Age. They're less willing to frame it as a monument to extraction, to ask directly what building and maintaining this palazzo actually took from the people who quarried the stone, laid the marble, served the meals, and scrubbed the floors. Doing that honestly would require uncomfortable conversations about how Cornelius Vanderbilt II's fortune was made. His grandfather, the Commodore, built the railroad empire through aggressive, often ruthless business tactics, crushing competitors, buying politicians, exploiting workers who laid track and ran trains under dangerous conditions for minimal pay. The Commodore was brilliant and brutal. Cornelius inherited the wealth, not the process, but he benefited from a system that concentrated money in a tiny number of hands while millions lived in poverty. The $7 million spent on the breakers, in today's terms over $200 million, could have funded hospitals, schools, housing for thousands. That's not to say Cornelius was obligated to spend his money that way, but it is to say that building the breakers was a choice to turn wealth into private splendor rather than public good. It's also to say that the house exists because of a specific economic system, one that allowed railroad barons to accumulate fortunes while workers died in accidents and earned wages that barely covered food and rent. One that treated domestic servants as a permanent underclass whose labor was essential but whose lives were disposable. One that assumed vast inequality was natural and that the rich deserved their marble palazzos because their success proved their virtue. These are the questions the breakers raises if you look past the gold leaf and carved ceilings. What is wealth for? Who creates it? Who benefits? What responsibilities come with having it? The house doesn't answer these questions. It just sits there, beautiful and troubling, waiting for visitors to ask. The servants who kept the breakers running were individuals, not abstractions. The records survive, fragmentary but real. Names, ages, positions, wages, lengths of service. Start with Mary. Mary worked as a housemaid from 1897 to 1903. 6 years. Her wages began at $180 per year. By the time she left, she was earning $200. Her job was cleaning bedrooms, bathrooms, hallways, dusting furniture, washing floors, changing linens. She worked 6 days a week, roughly 14 hours per day during the season. That's 84 hours per week. $200 per year for over 4,000 hours of labor comes out to less than 5 cents per hour. Her room was in the attic, shared with 2 other maids. A narrow bed, a small dresser, a single window. In summer, the attic was stifling. In winter, cold. Heating the servant quarters was low priority. The family's comfort came first. Mary ate in the servants' hall. Meals were provided, which was standard, but the food was simpler than what the family ate. Leftovers from upstairs, basic staples, enough to keep workers functioning, but nothing extravagant. She had 1 afternoon off per week, and every other Sunday. On those days, she could leave the estate, walk into Newport, see friends, go to church. Otherwise, she was on the property, on call, working. If a bell rang in the middle of her break, she had to respond. Why did she stay 6 years? Possibly because the pay, while meager, was reliable. Possibly because the Vanderbilts had a reputation as relatively decent employers. Some great houses were known for being brutal, abusive, impossible. The Breakers was demanding but not outright cruel. Possibly because Mary had few other options. Women of her class and background had limited paths. Domestic service, factory work, marriage. Each came with constraints. Service at least provided housing and food, even if it meant giving up almost all personal freedom. Mary left in 1903. The records don't say why. Maybe she married. Maybe she found better work elsewhere. Maybe she just got tired of climbing 4 flights of stairs a dozen times per day and decided any change was better than staying. Then there's Thomas, butler from 1895 to 1910. 15 years. He started at $750 per year and ended at $1,000. As butler, Thomas held significant authority. He managed the male staff, oversaw the wine cellar, one of the finest private collections in Newport, directed service during meals, ensuring footmen moved in perfect synchronization. His position was the pinnacle of servant hierarchy. He ate separately from lower staff, had a larger room, was treated with a degree of respect, but he was still a servant. His life revolved around the family's needs. He dressed them, served them, anticipated their desires, made himself available at any hour. The job required skill, knowing wines, managing difficult personalities among the staff, maintaining absolute discretion. The Vanderbilts and their guests spoke freely around Thomas because servants were expected to be invisible, to hear nothing, to repeat nothing. That discretion was valuable. Thomas knew things, who visited whom, who drank too much, which marriages were strained, what financial pressures the family faced. He kept all of it locked away because revealing any of it would mean instant dismissal and a ruined reputation that would make finding another position nearly impossible. Thomas retired in 1910, in his 60s. The Vanderbilts gave him a small pension, a rare gesture for the time. He lived another 8 years, died in Newport, and is buried in a local cemetery under a simple stone. His name appears in the household records, but nowhere else. No biography, no memoir, just a footnote in someone else's story. Catherine worked in the kitchen, cook's assistant, then eventually head cook. 23 years at the Breakers. From 1896 to 1919. Her wages started at $250 per year. and topped out at 500. She was responsible for producing the elaborate meals the family expected. 7 courses, multiple dishes per course, special diets accommodated, last-minute changes handled without complaint. Catherine worked in a kitchen that was state-of-the-art for 1895, but still brutal by modern standards. Gas ranges that had to be lit and monitored constantly. No thermostats, just experience and intuition. Ovens that ran too hot or too cold depending on a dozen variables. Massive pots that had to be lifted and stirred by hand. Meat that arrived whole and had to be butchered on site. Vegetables that had to be prepped from scratch. She supervised a staff of 6 in the kitchen. Sous cooks, scullery maids who washed dishes and scrubbed pots. A vegetable cook, a pastry specialist for desserts. During major dinners, the kitchen operated in controlled chaos. Timing was everything. Courses had to be ready exactly when the butler signaled. Too early and food cooled. Too late and the rhythm of the meal was destroyed. Catherine's authority in the kitchen was absolute, but that authority ended at the kitchen door. Upstairs, she was invisible. If a dish didn't meet expectations, the blame landed on her. If a guest complained, she might not even be told directly. Instructions came down through the butler or housekeeper. She was expected to adjust and improve without needing detailed feedback. The heat was relentless. Summer in a Newport kitchen, gas ranges blazing, humidity from boiling pots, no air conditioning, just open windows that didn't provide nearly enough circulation. Catherine and her staff worked in conditions that would violate every modern health and safety standard. Burns were routine, minor cuts constant, serious injuries not uncommon. A slip with a knife, a splash of boiling water, a pan dropped on a foot. Medical care was minimal. You bandaged what you could and kept working because the meals didn't stop. Catherine left in 1919. By then the world was different. World War I had reshaped labor markets. Women had more options. Factory jobs, office work, opportunities that didn't require living in someone else's house and working 18-hour days. She took a position in a restaurant in Providence, earned better money, had her own apartment, and finally controlled her own schedule. These 3 stories, Mary, Thomas, Catherine, multiply across hundreds of workers over the decades. The breakers operated as a private residence. Each person had reasons for taking the job. Each found some benefit in it, or they wouldn't have stayed. But each also paid a price: time, freedom, physical health, the chance to build a life on their own terms. The palazzo needed them. The beauty, the entertaining, the smooth operation of the household, all of it rested on their labor. But the systems that employed them were designed to extract maximum work for minimum pay, to keep them invisible, to treat them as interchangeable parts in a machine, rather than as people with their own hopes and needs. When tourists walk through the breakers today, they see marble and gold. They should also see Mary climbing stairs at dawn to light fires before the family woke, Thomas standing motionless in the dining room, while guests ate and talked as if he wasn't there. Catherine sweating in a kitchen hotter than any room upstairs, producing perfection on command. The house is beautiful because they made it function. Their labor is in every polished surface, every perfect meal, every seamless transition from course to course. The breakers is their monument, as much as it is Cornelius Vanderbilt's. The difference is that his name is on the plaques, and theirs are buried in ledgers that almost no one reads. Cornelius believed the breakers would stand forever. He was half right. The building is still here, 130 years later, stone and marble and steel, exactly as he designed, fireproof, weathering storms, anchored to bedrock. But the permanence he wanted, the dynasty, the unbroken line of Vanderbilts, living in wealth and power, that collapsed within 2 generations. Why? The simple answer is money. the fortune was finite. The spending was not. The Vanderbilt descendants divided the wealth among themselves, and each division made everyone a little less rich. Some invested poorly. Some spent recklessly. The railroads that built the empire became less profitable as cars and planes took over. Government regulation limited the monopolistic practices that had made the Commodore so dominant. The economic ground shifted, and the family did not adapt quickly enough. By the 1940s, most of the Vanderbilt fortune was gone, not entirely. Some descendants remained wealthy by normal standards, but the vast concentrated empire that once made them the richest family in America dissolved. The deeper answer is structural. Extreme wealth of the kind Cornelius inherited is almost impossible to maintain across generations without continuously extracting value from somewhere. The Commodore built his fortune through business dominance, political connections, and exploiting labor. He was active, ruthless, constantly looking for the next advantage. His children inherited the results. They managed what he built, expanded it cautiously, but they were not the same kind of predators. They were more interested in spending than in accumulating. Cornelius II tried to balance both. He worked hard, ran the railroad competently, but he also built the breakers. $7 million on a summer house. That kind of spending only makes sense if you believe the money is infinite. It wasn't. And once you've built the palazzo, you're locked in. You can't just abandon it. The costs never stop. Staff, maintenance, taxes, all of it continues whether you use the house or not. It's an asset that functions like a liability, beautiful, impressive, and slowly bleeding you dry. The third and fourth generations of Vanderbilts faced a world where that level of spending could not be sustained. Inheritance taxes took bigger bites. Social changes made the whole performance of Gilded Age aristocracy look outdated. Progressive movements pushed back against concentrations of wealth and power, and the family itself was too large. The Commodore's wealth divided among dozens of descendants, each with their own estates, their own spending, their own bad investments, dissipated into nothing. By the time Gladys inherited the breakers in 1934, the game was already over. The house survived because she gave it away. If she'd tried to keep it as a private residence, it would have been sold, probably torn down, certainly lost. Turning it into a museum saved the structure, but it also meant admitting defeat. The Vanderbilts could not keep what Cornelius built. The permanence he sought was always an illusion. That illusion is what makes the breakers fascinating and tragic at once. Walk through the entrance hall today. 3 stories of marble, painted ceilings, light pouring through tall windows. It's breathtaking. It feels solid, eternal, as if nothing could ever harm it. But it's also fragile. Not the stone. The stone is fine. The idea, the belief that wealth creates security, that excess protects you, that if you build something impressive enough, the world will have to acknowledge your permanence. Cornelius built the breakers after a fire destroyed his wooden house. The new house was fireproof. It couldn't burn, but that didn't save him. He died 4 years after moving in, at 55, worn out by stress. It didn't save Alice, who spent 35 years maintaining a shrine to her husband's vision, while the world changed around her in ways she couldn't control. It didn't save Gladys, who inherited a palace she couldn't afford to keep. The house endures. The people who built it, lived in it, worked in it, they're all gone. Their names survive in records, in archives, in the stones themselves if you know where to look. But the dream of permanence, the fantasy that money and marble could nail down the future, that died with Cornelius in 1899. What remains is evidence. The Breakers is a monument to Gilded Age ambition and to the limits of what ambition can achieve. It shows what wealth could buy at the peak of American industrial power. 70 rooms, marble walls, platinum leaf, art, beauty, comfort, control, and it shows what wealth could not buy: safety, continuity, immunity from change. The house asks a question every visitor has to answer for themselves. Was it worth it? $7 million, over $200 million today, for a summer house. Hundreds of workers laboring for years. Servants spending decades in invisible service. A family pouring resources into a structure they would ultimately lose. Was the beauty worth the cost? There's no simple answer. The Breakers is objectively stunning. The craftsmanship is museum quality. The art and design are historically significant. As a cultural artifact, it's invaluable. We learn from it. We study it. We preserve it because it tells us something about who we were and how we got here. But it's also a monument to inequality, to a system that concentrated wealth in a few hands while millions struggled, to an era when labor was cheap and human dignity was negotiable, to the belief that some people deserved marble palazzos while others deserved attic rooms and 18-hour days. Both things are true. The house is beautiful, and it's built on exploitation. It's a masterpiece and a moral failure. It's worth preserving and worth questioning. The Breakers doesn't resolve that tension. It just holds it, suspended in stone and gold, waiting for each generation to decide what lessons to take from it. The question for us now, standing more than a century after Cornelius built his palazzo, is what we choose to do with that knowledge. The Breakers still stands. It's one of Newport's biggest tourist attractions. Hundreds of thousands of people visit every year. They take photos. They buy souvenirs. They leave saying they saw how the other half lived. But do they see it? Really see it? Do they see Mary climbing stairs in the dark? Thomas standing silent while secrets were spoken around him? Catherine sweating in a kitchen that felt like a foundry? Do they see the system that made the beauty possible and ask whether that system was just? Do they think about the Commodore crushing competitors and exploiting workers to build the fortune that became the marble and gold? Do they wonder what else that $7 million could have built? Or do they see a fairy tale? Once upon a time, a rich family built a beautiful palace. The end. The answer matters because the Breakers is not just history. It's a mirror. The systems that built it concentrated wealth, exploited labor, treated inequality as natural. Those systems didn't end in 1900. They evolved. They're still here. The details changed. We have labor laws now, minimum wages, workplace protections. We have progressive taxation, though less than we once did. We have social programs, imperfect and underfunded, but we also have billionaires building vanity projects, while workers struggle to afford rent. We have corporations extracting maximum value from employees, while paying minimum wages. We have a system that still concentrates wealth in a tiny number of hands and treats that as evidence of virtue, rather than as a policy choice. We could change. The Breakers teaches us that this is not new. Extreme inequality is not a bug in the system. For much of American history, it's been the system, and the people at the top have always built monuments to convince themselves and everyone else that they deserve what they have. Sometimes those monuments are marble palazzos in Newport. Sometimes they're tech campuses, or private jets, or social media empires. The details change. The logic stays the same. Wealth equals virtue. Success proves merit. If you have money, you must have earned it. If you don't, you must deserve that too. The Breakers exposes that logic as myth. Cornelius didn't build his fortune through unique virtue. He inherited it. His grandfather built it through ruthless business tactics that would be illegal today. The workers who made the Breakers function were not less virtuous or less hard-working than the family upstairs. They just had less power, fewer options, and a system designed to keep them in place. Seeing that clearly means asking harder questions about wealth today. Where does it come from? What does it cost? Who pays? Not just in dollars, but in time, in health, in freedom, in the lives that could have been lived differently if resources were distributed more fairly. These are uncomfortable questions. They don't have easy answers, and they threaten people who benefit from the current system, just as they would have threatened Cornelius in his day. But they're worth asking. The Breakers, stripped of its fairy tale veneer, insists on it. So here's what the Breakers actually is. Not a monument to taste. Not a showcase of American success. Not proof that hard work and talent lead to marble palazzos. It's a ledger. On one side, beauty, craftsmanship, art, cultural achievement. The ability of human beings to imagine something extraordinary and then build it. On the other side, cost, exploitation, inequality, lives spent in service to someone else's dream. Workers who climbed stairs and scrubbed floors and cooked meals so that a single family could live in 70 rooms and convince themselves they had built something permanent. The ledger doesn't balance. It never does. You can't weigh the beauty of a painted ceiling against a worker's 18-hour day and call it even. You can't compare the value of a marble hall against a lifetime spent in invisible labor and say the trade was fair. The systems that built the Breakers were not designed to be fair. They were designed to concentrate wealth and power, to make that concentration look natural, inevitable, even beautiful. And they succeeded. The palazzo still stands, still dazzles, still draws crowds who leave talking about how amazing it must have been to live like that. The task for us, the ones who visit, who study, who try to understand what places like the Breakers mean, is to see both sides of the ledger, to hold the beauty and the cost in our heads at the same time, to refuse the easy story and sit with the hard one, to acknowledge that wealth can create extraordinary things and that those things often come at a price someone else pays. The Breakers doesn't teach us that beauty is bad or that wealth is evil. It teaches us that beauty and wealth exist in systems, systems that shape who benefits and who suffers, who gets to live in marble halls and who scrubs the floors, who builds monuments and whose names get carved into the stone. And it teaches us that those systems are not inevitable. They're choices, choices made by people, reinforced by laws and customs, maintained by the assumption that this is just how things are. The Commodore chose to crush competitors. Cornelius chose to spend $7 million on a summer house. Alice chose to maintain it as a shrine. Gladys chose to save it by giving it away. Every choice shaped what the Breakers became. We're making choices too, about what we preserve and how we talk about it, about which stories we tell and which we bury, about whether we treat places like the Breakers as fairy tales or as evidence, about what kind of system we want to build and who we want it to serve. The palazzo can't answer those questions for us, but it can, if we let it, make them impossible to ignore. The sun sets over the Breakers, the way it has for 130 years. Light slants through tall windows, catches the gold leaf in the music room, warms the marble in the great hall. The house glows. For a moment, it looks exactly the way Cornelius must have imagined it. Perfect, timeless, permanent. Then the light fades, shadows fill the corners. The tourists leave. The doors lock. The house goes quiet. In that silence, you can almost hear the ghosts, not literal ghosts. The Breakers is not that kind of story, but echoes, footsteps on marble stairs, a bell ringing in a distant corridor, voices murmuring in rooms long closed. Mary climbing to the attic after 14 hours of work. Thomas standing motionless in the dining room. Catherine pulling a roast from the oven while sweat runs down her back. Cornelius walking through the entrance hall late at night, checking the rooms, making sure everything is perfect, knowing even then that perfection wouldn't be enough. These echoes are what make the Breakers more than just a museum. They're what make it real. The house is not a fairy tale. It's a record, a document in stone and marble of what happens when wealth and ambition collide with human limits. When people try to build permanence in a world that refuses to stand still. When beauty comes at a price, and someone else is always asked to pay it. The record is messy, contradictory, uncomfortable. It doesn't offer easy heroes or clear villains, just people making choices inside a system that constrains some far more than others. Workers who needed wages, employers who wanted service, a family trying to prove they belonged, a world that judged them constantly and never quite let them forget they were outsiders. All of it tangled together in 70 rooms on a cliff above the Atlantic. The breakers survived because it became something different. Not a home, a museum, a place where people come to look at the past and decide what it means. That transformation saved the building. It also freed the building to tell a more honest story. When the house no longer has to perform aristocracy, it can instead perform memory. It can show what was, the grandeur and the gaps, the beauty and the cost. It can name the workers who kept it running. It can acknowledge that the fortune was built on railroad monopolies and exploited labor. It can admit that even $7 million couldn't buy the permanence Cornelius wanted. It can be evidence instead of fantasy. Whether visitors accept that evidence is another question. Many come for the fairy tale and leave satisfied. They see the rooms, admire the art, imagine what it would be like to live in a palace. They don't ask what it cost or who paid. They don't see Mary or Thomas or Catherine. They see marble and gold and think, this is what success looks like. That's a choice. And it's the same choice every generation makes when it looks at the past. Do we see what's comfortable, or do we see what's true? Do we admire the surface, or do we dig into the structure beneath it? Do we accept the story we're told, or do we ask harder questions? The Breakers offers both paths. The polished tour that hits the highlights and sends you home impressed, and the harder version that names names, shows ledgers, traces the systems that made the beauty possible, and asks whether it was worth it. Both paths walk through the same rooms, but they tell very different stories. One story ends with marble and gold. The other ends with a question. What are we building now? And who's paying for it? If you found this investigation into the Breakers valuable, there are dozens more stories like this waiting to be told. Gilded Age mansions across America, each one a monument to wealth, ambition, and the human cost of both. Each one holding evidence of how we got here and what we chose along the way. These stories matter, not because they're about rich people and beautiful houses, though they are, but because they're about systems, about how wealth concentrates, about who benefits when it does, about what gets built and what gets destroyed in the process. The Breakers is one chapter. The Vanderbilt story is one family, but the pattern repeats. In Newport, in New York, in California, across the country, marble palazzos and railroad fortunes, invisible workers and 18-hour days, families who believed they had built permanence, and then watched it crumble. Examining these stories honestly means questioning myths we've been taught to accept, that great wealth is always earned, that inequality is natural, that the system rewards merit, that the people at the top got there through virtue alone. The Breakers dismantles those myths, quietly, in 70 rooms of marble and gold. If you're willing to look, the house is still there. On a cliff in Newport, waves still crash on the rocks below. Tourists still walk through the entrance hall and stare up at the painted ceiling. The machinery Cornelius set in motion 130 years ago is still running. But the meaning has changed. The palazzo that was supposed to announce permanence now announces fragility. The fortress that was supposed to provide security now provides lessons about the limits of wealth. The monument that was supposed to prove the Vanderbilts belonged now proves that belonging bought through performance is always temporary. These lessons are the Breakers' real inheritance, not the marble, not the gold. The knowledge that beauty and exploitation can exist in the same space, that wealth and insecurity can live in the same house, that you can build something that lasts for centuries and still fail to build what you actually wanted. Cornelius wanted permanence. What he got was a museum, a place where strangers walk through his rooms and judge his choices, a monument to ambition that doubles as a monument to limits. Maybe that's not what he wanted, but it's what we need. Places like the Breakers force us to see the gap between the story we tell about wealth and the reality of how it works, between the fairy tale of earned success and the truth of inherited advantage, exploited labor, and systems designed to concentrate power. Closing that gap requires honesty, the kind of honesty that names Mary and Thomas and Catherine, that counts their hours and measures their wages against the price of a painted ceiling, that asks what else $7 million could have built and whether a marble palazzo was really the best answer. The Breakers can't force that honesty, but it can offer the evidence, the ledgers, the floor plans, the servant staircases, the attic rooms, all of it preserved, documented, waiting for visitors to decide whether they want the fairy tale or the truth. The palazzo stands. The waves crash. The sun sets over 70 rooms on a cliff, and the question hangs in the air, unanswered and unavoidable. Was it worth it? You decide.